The sun was bleeding out over the desert when Marshal Clay Ransom rode down from the mesas and into Red Fork, New Mexico territory. The sky above him burned the color of a dying ember, and the air tasted of dust and distance, the kind of stillness that carried the smell of trouble before a man ever saw it. His horse, a black gelding with a white blaze, moved slow and steady through the last gold light, hooves crunching on the hardpan road. Ransom had been riding 6 days from Fort Wingate, following a trail that twisted through ghost towns, dry riverbeds, and Apache country. He carried a single warrant folded in his saddlebag, a name written in ink that had bled from sweat and time. Whisper, a half-Apache renegade accused of leading raids on ranches from the San Pedro Valley clear to the Pecos. The army wanted him dead. The towns wanted him gone. And Ransom, well, he wanted to finish the job and forget the faces that came before. He was a man carved by the war and the desert both, with a face too hard for mercy and eyes that told no stories. The scar on his jaw caught the sunset light like a slash of silver. Somewhere out beyond the mesas, thunder rolled, though there wasn't a cloud to be seen. By the time he reached Red Fork, the sky had gone purple and the wind carried grit sharp enough to sting the skin. The town looked like a memory someone forgot to bury. A single street of warped boardwalks, sagging signs, and crooked lamps. A stray dog crossed in front of his horse, ribs showing through its hide. The saloon was the only place still alive, yellow light spilling through swinging doors, laughter inside low and mean. Ransom tied his horse to the post, brushed the dust from his coat, and stepped in. The smell hit him first: whiskey, tobacco, sweat, and the faint trace of lilac. Then came the sound. A piano tinkering out a tune that had seen better years. Dice clattering. Men talking low and dangerous, and then he saw her. She stood on the small stage near the piano, her voice rising above the noise like a silver thread through smoke. Her dress was red velvet trimmed in black lace, worn at the edges but still catching the lamplight in a way that made the whole room hold its breath. Her hair, long and gold like ripened wheat, spilled over her shoulders, and her eyes, Lord, those eyes were the color of a high desert storm, blue-gray and ready to break. Ransom watched her for a long moment before moving to the bar. He ordered whiskey. The barkeep poured without asking questions. When the song ended, the crowd clapped, half-hearted, more out of habit than kindness. She gave a little curtsy, then walked toward the bar, brushing past Ransom with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You look like a man who's seen too much sun," she said softly, voice carrying that southern lilt that made men forget their sins for a minute. "Seen worse," Ransom replied, not looking at her. "Name's Lila June Morrison," she said, leaning against the counter, close enough that he caught the lilac scent again. "You ain't from around here." "No," he said. "And I ain't staying long." Her smile faltered just slightly. "That's what they all say." He took a sip of whiskey, letting the burn chase the dust from his throat. "You know a man called Whisper?" The name froze her hand halfway to her glass. For a second, the saloon noise seemed to fade, just the two of them standing in that haze of smoke and lamplight. Then she laughed softly, though the sound was brittle. "Can't say I do. Sounds like one of those ghost stories the soldiers tell after too much rot gut." Ransom looked at her, really looked. Her hands trembled just enough for him to see it. "He's real. And close. I've been following his trail for near a week." Lila turned away, pretending to fix a curl of her hair. "If he's as bad as you say, Marshal, maybe you should keep riding. Men who go hunting ghosts don't always come back. I ain't the type that scares easy." She smiled again, but this time it carried something sad. "Then I pity you." That night, Ransom took a room above the saloon. The walls were thin. He could hear the piano below, the laughter, the clink of bottles. Somewhere in that mix, he caught Lila's voice again, softer now, singing a lullaby that didn't belong in a place like this. He lay on the bed, hat tilted over his eyes, listening. Outside, the desert wind moaned through the gaps in the shutters. He thought about the warrant in his saddlebag, the name written in fading ink. He thought about Lila June's trembling hands. The next morning, he stepped out to find the town near empty. A wagon had come through in the night, stripped of horses by raiders. Folks were scared, talking about shadows on the ridgeline, painted riders seen in the moonlight. The old blacksmith spat and said, "Ain't no man alive moves that quiet 'cept the Apache Whisper. He's back sure as sin." Ransom's jaw tightened. He saddled his horse and rode to the edge of town, scanning the horizon. The mesas in the distance looked like sleeping giants, red and gold beneath the morning sun. As he turned to ride back, he saw her, Lila, standing near the well, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. She looked small against the emptiness. "Marshal," she called softly, her voice trembling in the dry wind. "If you keep after him, you'll find only ghosts out there." He dismounted, walked up to her. "You keep talking like you know him." For a heartbeat, something raw flickered in her eyes. Then she looked away. "I know what war does to men. I've seen what it turns them into." Ransom's voice dropped low. "You talk like a woman with something to hide." She lifted her chin. "Maybe I am. Maybe that's the only way a woman lives out here." Their eyes met, his cold and steady, hers burning with some secret she wouldn't name. And in that moment, Ransom understood two things. The whisper wasn't far, and this woman was tangled up in his trail one way or another. He tipped his hat. "Then I reckon I'll see you when the ghosts start talking." Lila's lips parted, as if to warn him, but he was already turning, mounting his horse, riding back into the red light that shimmered over the desert. Behind him, the wind caught the sound of her voice, soft, prayer-like, and carried it into the empty land. "Lord, have mercy on the both of us." The next few days passed like slow thunder over the desert, the kind that never breaks but rattles through a man's bones just the same. Marshal Clay Ransom stayed in Red Fork longer than he'd planned, though he couldn't quite say why. The horse thieves hadn't struck again, and the trail had gone cold. Yet something in this sunburnt little town kept him there, circling like a buzzard that wasn't sure whether the thing it watched was dead or only pretending. He told himself it was duty, the need to flush out this whisper before the man vanished, back into the canyons, but deep down Ransom knew better. It was her, Lila June Morrison. She sang every night in the saloon, her voice turning whiskey into velvet and smoke into prayer. Men came in loud and left quiet. When she sang, the barroom hush felt almost holy, though the words themselves were mostly about heartbreak and leaving. Ransom took his usual table by the back wall, hat low over his eyes, nursing the same drink long after it went warm. Each night she finished her last song, looked his way, and gave that faint knowing smile, the kind a woman uses when she's daring a man to speak. But he never did. Not until the fourth night, when the world outside the saloon turned to storm. The wind came howling through Red Fork like some restless spirit, slamming shutters and scattering sand down the empty street. The piano had gone silent, the drinkers long since gone to cover. Only Ransom and Lila remained, the lamps burning low, the air thick with smoke and stormlight. She was wiping down the bar when he spoke. "You ever gonna tell me why you keep flinching at that name?" She froze, rag still in her hand. "What name?" "Whisper." For a heartbeat, only the wind answered. Then she set the rag aside and poured herself a drink. Her fingers shook just enough for him to notice. She threw the whiskey back in one gulp and stared at the empty glass. "You ever lose somebody, Marshal?" she asked softly. Ransom leaned back in his chair, eyes shadowed. "Lost more than my share," she nodded, eyes still on the glass. "Then you'll understand, Whisper. He ain't just some outlaw to me." Ransom said nothing, waiting. Finally, she turned toward him, her voice barely more than a whisper itself. "He's my brother." The words hit the air like a gunshot in church. She didn't look away, didn't flinch now. "Half-brother, to be exact. Our father was a cavalry scout. Our mother, Apache. We were both born between two worlds, and neither one ever wanted us." Ransom's eyes narrowed slightly, but his tone stayed even. "So what happened?" Lila laughed once, a dry, bitter sound. "What always happens. The army came. Said they were pacifying the territory. They burned our village while we were still children. My mother, she didn't make it. I was taken in by a preacher's wife in Santa Fe. Whisper, back then he was just Thomas, ran off into the hills. Said he'd never wear white man's chains. I didn't see him again for 15 years. She turned away, staring out the window where the storm tossed dust across the street. Then one day he came back, not as Thomas, not even as my brother. He came back painted for war, calling himself the Apache Whisper. Said he'd seen too much to ever come home again. Said mercy was a word the desert didn't understand. Ransom rose slowly, walking closer. And now he's leading raids, killing ranchers. Burnin' stuck. Her shoulders tensed, but her voice was firm. You think he's the only one to ever spill blood in this country? I've seen the things your army's done too, Marshal. You call it law. He calls it vengeance. Either way, the desert drinks it all the same. For a long time, neither spoke. The wind outside howled like a wounded coyote, rattling the window panes. Finally, Ransom said, quieter now, "You could have told me sooner." "And what would that change?" she shot back. "You came here with your warrant already signed. You'd have dragged him off in irons before I said 2 words. He looked at her. Really looked. The fierce tilt of her chin, the pain behind her pride. She was trembling, but not from fear. From memory. "I ain't the hangman," he said. Not yet. Her eyes met his, unsearching, unsure. "Then what are you, Marshal?" He let out a slow breath. "Just a man trying to make peace with his ghosts." The silence between them stretched long and heavy. Then Lila said, "If you go after him, he'll kill you." "Maybe," Ransom said, voice low. "But if I don't, someone else will. And they won't stop at him. They'll burn every camp, every soul that ever gave him food or fire. You know how the army works." Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked at him, this scarred lawman standing before her, weary and unyielding, and something softened in her gaze. "Then let me come with you," she whispered. Ransom blinked. "You? He might listen to me." "He won't listen to any man with a badge." The Marshal hesitated. The desert outside was still roaring with wind, but inside the quiet felt deeper than any canyon. "You ride with me, you leave this town behind. You might not come back. I stopped belonging anywhere a long time ago." Ransom studied her face, the defiance, the sorrow, the faint trace of hope she couldn't quite hide. Finally, he gave a single nod. "Sunrise, then." She smiled faintly. "You don't strike me as a man who keeps company easy." "I don't," he said. "But I reckon I could make an exception." The storm broke outside, rain falling in heavy sheets, washing the dust off the windows. Lila looked out at it, voice soft. Maybe the desert's finally had enough blood. Ransom poured another whiskey, set the bottle down between them. "Ain't never that simple. But maybe we can keep it from taking more." They drank in silence, the rain whispering against the glass. When the lamps burned low, Lila stood to leave. At the doorway, she turned back. The firelight caught her hair, turning it to molten gold. "Marshal," he lifted his eyes. "You said you're a man trying to make peace with ghosts. What happens if you find one that don't want to be forgiven?" He thought for a long moment before answering. "Then I reckon I'll forgive him anyway." She nodded once, slow and sad, then vanished into the storm. Ransom stood there long after she'd gone, watching the rain carve little rivers through the dust of Red Fork. He'd spent his life chasing outlaws and phantoms, but now for the first time he wasn't sure which he was hunting, a criminal, or a broken man who'd lost everything but his hate. And somewhere deep inside, though he'd never admit it, he feared that in chasing Whisper, he might be chasing a reflection of himself. The desert dawn came pale and cold, a silver line stretching over the far mesas like God himself was drawing breath. Red Fork was still asleep when Marshal Clay Ransom saddled his horse. The world smelled of rain and dust, that clean, empty scent that comes after a storm washes sin off the land. Though in truth, no rain could ever scrub this country clean. Lila June Morrison stood waiting outside the saloon, wrapped in a faded riding cloak and holding a small leather satchel. Her hair was pinned up now, though a few golden strands had escaped, glinting in the first light. She looked smaller in the morning, less like the saloon queen who held men's hearts in her song, more like a woman who'd run out of places to hide. "You sure about this?" Ransom asked, tightening the cinch strap. "I'm sure," she said quietly. "He's out there somewhere, Marshal. And if you ride without me, you'll never find him before he finds you." He studied her face a long moment. "You ever ride Apache country before?" "I grew up under its sun," she said. "Before I learned to wear lace and lie for a livin'." Ransom gave a small nod. "Then let's ride." They left Red Fork behind as the sun climbed up over the desert, turning the world to copper and fire. The road wound east toward the broken ridges of the San Andres Range, where the land rose in jagged steps and shadows cut deep canyons through the stone. There were no towns past that way, no law, just wind, sand, and ghosts. By noon, the heat had settled like a weight on their shoulders. Ransom rode silent, scanning the horizon. Lila followed a few paces behind, her hat pulled low, eyes shaded. Every so often she'd glance toward the distant mesas, old memories flickering behind her gaze like heat mirages. Near sunset, they reached a dry wash where a few stunted mesquite trees grew. Ransom dismounted and led the horses into the shade. "We'll make camp here," he said. Lila nodded, setting her pack down. They worked without speaking. He gathered wood, she unrolled a blanket and struck flint for the fire. When the flames caught, throwing orange light over the stones, Ransom poured them both coffee from his tin pot. The first stars blinked awake above them, clear and sharp as cut glass. "You ever miss it?" Lila asked suddenly. "Miss what?" "The war. The march and the orders, the meaning of it all." He stared into the fire. "Can't miss something that never had any." She smiled faintly, eyes on the flames. "My brother used to say the same. He said war was just men fighting to see who could forget mercy first." Ransom looked up. "And which side won?" She met his eyes across the fire. "Neither." The silence that followed was comfortable, the kind that settles between two people who have seen too much to waste words. When the night deepened, Ransom spread his coat on the ground and lay back, staring up at the stars. Lila lay a few feet away, her face turned toward the heavens, eyes glimmering in the faint light. After a while, she whispered, "He used to tell me stories about the spirits in these canyons. Said they whisper in the wind and tell in secrets of the dead. Maybe that's why they call him what they do." Ransom's voice was low. "Maybe. Or maybe he just learned to move quieter than the rest of us." They both drifted to silence again, listening to the wind slide through the rocks, a sound that might have been a whisper if a man let his imagination run wild. By morning, they were back in the saddle, climbing deeper into the canyon lands. The sun lit the cliffs in shades of rust and gold, and the air grew thin and dry. By midday, they found signs. Faint hoofprints in the dust, a burned-out camp, ashes still warm. Ransom crouched, running his fingers through the sand. "He's close." Lila's voice trembled just a little. "Then we're almost out of time." They pressed on until the canyon walls closed in around them, tall and red as cathedral columns. The trail wound through like a scar, narrow, winding, perfect for an ambush. Ransom's hand stayed near his Colt. "Don't move sudden," he said. They rode on slowly, every sound magnified. The creak of saddle leather, the echo of hooves on stone, the whisper of wind curling through the rocks. Then, without warning, a voice came from above, low, steady, and cold as a blade. "Don't reach for that iron, lawman." Ransom froze. Lila's breath caught. A man stepped out from the ledge above them, rifle in hand. His hair was long and black, tied with a strip of red cloth. His skin was sun-darkened, his eyes bright and hard. He wore a mix of Apache buckskin and army blue, scavenged from both sides of the line. "Whisper," Lila breathed. The man's eyes flicked to her, and for the first time something human cracked his stony mask. He jumped down from the ledge, landing light as a cat. "Little bird," he said softly, using the name she'd not heard since childhood. "You shouldn't have come here." "I had to," she said, sliding off her horse. "You've got soldiers coming for you. You keep this up. They'll wipe out every camp from here to the Rio Grande." Whisper looked past her toward Ransom. "And this one? You bring me a hangman for company?" Ransom stayed still, eyes steady. "Marshal Clay Ransom. I came to take you in, Whisper. Alive if you make it easy." A flicker of something, humor or pity, passed over the Apache's face. "Alive, huh? That's a rare offer for my kind." Lila stepped between them, her hands raised. "He ain't your enemy, Thomas. Please listen to me." At the sound of his old name, the Apache's eyes softened just for a moment. "That name died in fire, sister." Then a shadow moved in the cliff center, and Ransom's instinct screamed. He spun just as a shot cracked the silence. The bullet struck the ground near his boot. Whisper's men, a half-dozen of them, were emerging from the rocks, painted for war, rifles glinting in the sun. Ransom drew fast, firing once, hitting the stone beside the shooter's head. "Tell your boys to hold," he barked. Whisper raised his hand and the men froze. Dust drifted through the air like smoke. "This ain't the time for blood," Lila said, voice shaking but strong. "Please, Thomas, you said the spirits watch over us here. Don't make them watch another killing." For a moment the canyon was nothing but breath and silence. Then Whisper lowered his rifle. "You should go," he said quietly. "Both of you. Before my men forget you're my blood." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "Thomas, you can't keep running." There's no mercy left in this desert. Whisper's gaze softened. Then maybe it's time I stop asking for it. He turned to go, melting back into the rocks like he'd never been there. Lila stepped forward. Wait! But Ransom caught her arm. Let him go, he said gently. For now. She looked up at him, eyes glistening. You still mean to bring him in? Ransom's jaw tightened. I mean to keep him alive if I can. They stood there as the canyon swallowed the last of the Whisper and his men. The air was still again, heavy with unspoken things. When they finally made camp that night, neither spoke for a long time. The fire crackled low. Lila sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, staring into the flames. He's still in there, she whispered finally. The boy I knew. The one who told stories about stars and spirits, he just forgot who he was. Ransom looked across the fire at her. Then maybe it's time somebody reminded him. Their eyes met, two weary souls caught between duty and desire, mercy and revenge. The desert wind sighed through the stones like a prayer, and somewhere far off a coyote cried to the moon. And for the first time, Ransom didn't hear loneliness in that sound. He heard promise. By the next morning, the world had turned the color of old blood, sky pink at the edges, sand glowing like copper beneath it. Marshall Clay Ransom woke to the crackle of dying embers and the faint sound of Lila's voice humming an old hymn, low and worn as a river stone. It was a tune he half remembered from another life, back when church bells still rang somewhere east of the Mississippi, and a man could still believe in forgiveness. Lila sat near the fire, her hair unpinned and loose, catching the morning light like threads of gold. She stopped humming when she saw him stir. Sleep? She asked softly. Some, he said, rubbing the grit from his eyes. Dreamed of thunder, she smiled faintly. That's the desert's way of warning you. He poured 2 cups of coffee, handed her one. They drank in silence, the wind sliding soft over the canyon rim above them. The air felt heavy, thick with the kind of calm that comes before something breaks. We can still turn back, he said finally. You've done your part, Lila shook her head. No, he's close. I can feel it. He'll make his stand soon. You sure it's a stand he's making? Her eyes met his. He's tired, Marshall. Even vengeance has a weight. I seen it in his eyes yesterday, and he's carrying too many ghosts. Ransom looked out at the mesas, their jagged shadows cutting long across the sand. Ain't we all? They rode north through the narrow ravines that led deeper into Apache country. The land grew stranger, red stone arches and cliffs shaped by wind into faces that watched them pass. The silence pressed in, broken only by the creak of saddle leather and the distant cry of an eagle. By noon, they reached a high plateau overlooking a dry canyon split in two by a riverbed long dead. Smoke curled faintly from somewhere below. A campfire. Ransom reined in, eyes narrowing. There, Lila followed his gaze. That's his place. He used to call it the Hollow of Bones, he frowned. Sounds inviting. It was where our mother taught us the old song, she said quietly. Before the army came, Ransom exhaled slow. Then I reckon it's time we pay our respects. They left the horses tied among the rocks and went down on foot, moving quiet. The closer they came, the more Ransom felt that prickle on the back of his neck, the one that told him death was near. Then, just as the canyon opened wide before them, a gunshot cracked. The bullet hit the rock beside his head, spraying dust. Ransom dove for cover, pulling Lila down with him. Stay low, he barked. A second shot rang out, then a third. The echoes rolled through the canyon like thunder. Ransom returned fire once, his Colt barking flame into the sunlight. Whisper, Lila screamed, her voice echoing off the stone. Stop it, it's me. Silence followed, sharp, unnatural. Then a figure appeared on the ridge above, silhouetted against the white sky. Whisper. Rifle slung in his hands. Paint streaked across his face like war tears. He looked down at them, and even from that distance, Ransom could see the war inside him. You shouldn't have come back here, Whisper called, voice carried on the wind. You bring the bluecoat's dog to my mother's grave? Lila stood slowly, ignoring Ransom's warning hand. I came to bring you home. Whisper laughed once, bitter and hollow. There ain't no home left, sister. The white men burned it. You sing for them now, dance for their coins. Her eyes glistened, but she stood her ground. And you kill for their ghosts. Tell me, Thomas, which one of us sold our soul? The wind caught her words and scattered them like ash. Whisper's rifle lowered an inch, uncertainty flickering across his face. Then movement flashed behind him. Riders emerging from the rocks, a dozen or more, painted Apache warriors with rifles and bows. One of them shouted, pointing toward Ransom, "Army!" Before Whisper could speak, the air exploded in chaos. Gunfire tore through the canyon, horses screaming, bullets ricocheting off stone. Ransom fired back, dragging Lila behind a boulder. Dust choked the air, the world turned to noise and fury. "Stay down," he shouted, but Lila's eyes went wild. "He's gonna die." She tried to run, but Ransom caught her arm. "You go out there, you'll get yourself killed." Then a shot ripped the stone beside them. Ransom ducked, but Lila broke free. "Lila!" he roared. She stumbled into the open, her dress torn, hair flying loose. She looked up at the ridge where her brother stood, torn between the war around him and the woman below. The gunfire slowed as both sides saw her. Dust hung heavy, sunlight slicing through it like a blade. And then, with the whole canyon watching, she began to unbutton her dress, her voice carried soft and shaking. "No more blood. No more hate. If this is what it takes for you to see me, brother, then look." She dropped the red velvet down into the dust, standing in her white slip, trembling in the harsh light. The fighting stopped. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Whisper's rifle wavered, his painted face unreadable. The men around him looked from her to him unsure. Then in the silence, Whisper spoke, voice low, breaking like a prayer. "Lord, have mercy." He stepped forward, rifle falling from his hands, eyes locked on his sister. "You shouldn't have done that, little bird." Lila's tears caught the sunlight. "Then stop making me have to." He reached the canyon floor slowly, his men watching, guns still raised but uncertain. Ransom stood ready, his Colt lowered but not holstered. Whisper stopped a few feet from Lila. For the first time since the war, the mask fell from his face. And what remained wasn't a monster, but a man. "A brother. They took everything," he said quietly. "Mother, home, you." She reached out, touched his cheek. "Then take back what's left. Take back mercy." Whisper closed his eyes. And when he opened them again, something was gone. The rage, maybe. The hunger for vengeance that had burned too long. He nodded once, slow. Then his gaze shifted to Ransom. "You still mean to take me in, Marshal?" Ransom hesitated. The wind blew grit between them. "I mean to stop the killin'," he said. "Whatever it takes." Whisper gave a weary smile. "Then maybe it's time I stop running." He turned to his men, raising a hand. "Go, back to the hills. This fight's done." They looked at one another, unsure, then melted into the rocks like smoke. The canyon grew still again, save for the whispering wind. Lila bent to pick up her dress, her voice trembling. "It's over." Ransom holstered his gun. "Not yet. The army won't see it that way." She looked at him, fear flickering behind her eyes. "Then what do we do?" He looked from her to Whisper, the red cliffs towering around them like silent judges. "We get him out of here before they find us. After that?" He paused, glancing toward the horizon. "We let the desert decide." As the sun dipped behind the canyon wall, the three of them began their slow climb out, a lawman, a renegade, and a woman who'd stood between them and saved them both. And though the dust still clung to her hair, though the red dress lay torn and ruined behind her, there was something in Lila's eyes now that neither man could name, something like peace. 3 days after the canyon burned with gunfire and silence, Red Fork woke to a sunrise like none it had ever seen. The air carried the scent of rain, the first in months, and the desert stretched wide and gold under the newborn light. Folks said the land looked different that morning, softer somehow, as if the wind itself had laid down its arms. Marshal Clay Ransom rode in slow through the northern pass, dust clinging to his coat and the brim of his hat pulled low. The black gelding's sides heaved with exhaustion, and behind him on a smaller bay mare rode Lila June Morrison. Her once bright red dress was folded in her saddlebag, torn and dusty from the canyon, but her eyes held a quiet fire that made even the roughest men in town step aside when she passed. Between them rode no prisoner, no outlaw bound in irons, only the emptiness of a choice made in mercy. They'd left Whisper behind in the mesas. After that standoff, after Lila's tears and the surrender in her brother's eyes, he'd refused to come with them. "The desert's my penance," he'd said, his voice cracked and hollow. I'll walk till the spirits take me. Tell your law I'm already dead. Ransom could have stopped him. Should have, maybe. But when he'd looked into the man's eyes so much like Lila's, he'd seen something he couldn't bring himself to shackle. So he'd nodded once and turned away, letting Whisper vanish into the red horizon like smoke returning to the fire. Now, as Red Fork came into view, Ransom felt the weight of that decision settle deep in his bones. They rode down the main street in silence. Folks stared, some tipping hats, others whispering. The story had already made its way through town faster than dust in the wind. How the saloon singer had faced down an Apache war band. How she'd dropped her dress in the dust to stop a killing. Some called it madness, others called it a miracle. Either way, the name Lila June was now spoken with a kind of reverence usually reserved for saints or sinners, depending on who you asked. Ransom dismounted in front of the saloon. His legs ached like fire, but his heart felt stranger, hollow and heavy all at once. "You go on in," he said to Lila. "I've got a report to send east." She looked at him, a flicker of hurt crossing her face. "A report saying what, Marshal? That you lost your man?" He sighed, meeting her gaze. "A report saying justice was served the only way it could be." For a moment, the two of them stood there just looking at each other as the town came alive around them. Wagons rolling, horses snorting, doors creaking open. It all felt like a world trying to move on while theirs had stopped somewhere out there in that canyon. Then Lila smiled faintly, though her voice trembled. "You ain't much for words, are you?" "No," Ransom said. "But I mean the ones I got." He tipped his hat and turned toward the telegraph office. She watched him go, the morning light painting his silhouette gold. Inside, Ransom sat at the desk, staring at the blank paper for a long while before finally writing. To the Office of Territorial Law, Santa Fe, the man known as Whisper is presumed deceased. No further raids expected. Civilian assistance rendered invaluable. Territory secured. Marshal Clay Ransom. He read it twice, then signed it with a hand that didn't quite stop shaking. When he stepped back out into the light, he found her waiting. "You tell your bosses you found peace?" she asked with a soft smile. "Something like that," he said. They walked together down the boardwalk, past the smithy and the general store. A few townsfolk nodded at them, respectful now. Even the barkeep, who'd once said no lawman ever lasted in Red Fork more than a week, tipped his hat. When they reached the end of the street, Lila stopped. The breeze caught the edge of her shawl, carrying with it the scent of lilacs and dust. "So what happens now, Marshal?" Ransom looked out over the open land. Endless, empty, beautiful. "Don't rightly know. Might ride north. Might stay a while." Her lips curved. "You strike me as the restless kind," he smiled faintly. "You strike me as the reason a man might stop." For the first time since he'd met her, she blushed. Not the kind of blush born of flattery, but the kind that comes from being seen. They turned toward the saloon, now quiet in the morning light. She paused at the doors. "You coming in tonight?" "If there's whiskey in your singing, I reckon I'd be a fool not to." She laughed softly. "Then don't be late." That night, Red Fork felt different. The saloon was full, but the noise was softer, almost reverent. The lamps glowed golden and the piano played slow. When Lila took the stage, the room fell to a hush. She wore a new dress, simple blue cotton instead of red velvet, and though her voice trembled at first, it soon found its strength. The song she sang wasn't about heartbreak or whiskey this time. It was about mercy, about men and women lost and found in the dust. Ransom leaned against the rail upstairs, hat in hand, listening. Her voice filled the room and the spaces inside him that had been hollow for too long. When she finished, there was no applause, only quiet. The kind of quiet that means something holy just passed through. Afterward, when the lamps were turned low and the crowd had gone, Ransom found her outside on the balcony overlooking the sleeping town. The stars spread wide overhead, the wind soft, carrying the smell of mesquite and rain. He stepped up beside her. "You sing like someone who's been forgiven." She looked up at him, eyes shining. "Maybe I have. Maybe we both have." He took off his hat, set it aside, and for the first time since the war let himself breathe easy. "You think mercy's something a man earns or something he's given?" Lila smiled faintly. "Maybe it's both. Maybe it's just a woman standing in the dust telling the world she's had enough of hate." They stood there in silence a while, the stars glimmering above them. Then softly, Ransom reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. "Lila," he said, his voice low. "You ever think about leaving this place? Starting fresh somewhere green?" She looked out toward the horizon, that endless stretch of desert that had taken so much from her but given back something too. "No," she said finally. "This land's still got pieces of me buried in it. I reckon I'll stay till it remembers who I was." Ransom smiled. "Then I guess I'll stay too." She turned to him, eyes glimmering with something fierce and tender. "Then I reckon we'll both have to learn how to live." Below them, a coyote howled, not in sorrow this time, but in song. Somewhere out there, beyond the ridges and mesas, a lone figure walked through the desert twilight, the Apache whisper. Alive in legend if not in flesh, his footprints fading into the sand. Ransom looked up at the stars, then down at the woman beside him. "Reckon we both found what we weren't looking for," he murmured. Lila smiled. "And what's that, Marshall?" He looked at her, really looked, and said softly, "A reason to stop running," she laughed, leaning her head against his shoulder as the desert wind wrapped around them like a prayer. And when the dawn came again over Red Fork, it found the saloon doors swinging open to a new day, the dust still settling, and two weary souls finally at peace in a land that had forgotten the meaning of mercy, until a woman in a red dress reminded it.